Hey, I'm Charlie. Welcome to the channel, and I want to talk about some tweets, or one in particular. A couple weekends ago, got a lot of run on Twitter. It was over a weekend. I guess a lot of people were on, and a lot of engagement, a lot of commentary. But obviously, what I had initiated was something that was thought provoking or interesting to others. And what I said was, I can't recall there being a time where I was considering whether it be rehab or training techniques that I probably would have demonized a decade ago. And I think that's good. I think we should all look back in 5 years ago and be like, "Oh my God, I can't believe I did that." I think one of the things that I was referring to was training on machines, and a lot of this really stems back for way before a couple weekends ago, or when these thoughts have been prevalent over the last little while. Was, gosh, 5 years, 4 years ago, Mike Davis and I went to Atlanta for a seminar, and we met up with Eric Otter, who was there at the time. And that trip, aside from what Eric suggested, that really got this thought process going, was it was very memorable for things other than training or rehabilitation. And that's probably maybe why I have this connection to this thought process, because it had nothing to do with the thought process. It was a lot of other things that were very cool. One of which is one of the several stories that the Hooters in downtown Atlanta has in my history. It's a very interesting place that seems to always generate a very cool story. And those of you that have heard the stories, you know what I'm talking about. But Eric has suggested this very simple statement that I have not forgotten for several years, and actually started to put into play for other reasons. He said the organelles have to get in there somehow. And there's clearly this physiological response that happens inside muscles, and they don't know how it's happening. Muscles don't care who the opponent is. Given the run that this Twitter was getting, I had tweeted that probably a long time ago, probably talking about the same topic, and somebody found that muscles don't care who their opponent is, and I believe that. Now, the reality is, no matter what organelles and what improved or enhanced physiology is happening inside the muscle tissue or other areas that are being affected by the training choice, you will never be able to access all of them in anything other than that activity. So for instance, if you train on leg press, yes, there's real things that are happening in the legs that carry over to sport or other forms of function. But you'll never get all of them. It's impossible. The motor strategies, recruiting motor units, rate of force, all of these things are always going to be specific. So this isn't a discussion that you should train on machines, and the leg press is one that I would still linearly suggest to never use. There are some other lower body exercises that I would use. But it all starts with, there's certain things that happen in muscles, and it doesn't matter what the exercise is. Now, is your knee going to explode on a knee extension? Is your back going to explode on a leg press? Well, there's probably rationale to say yes or no, given different situations of context. Where do you start? So do you have some kind of physical limitation that is going to be exploited by this other approach? But when we talk about the organelles have to get in there somehow, again, credit that to Eric Otter and how that put me on this thought process for the last several years. Whether we're talking about mitochondria, we're talking about hormonal value in terms of increasing mass of endocrine glands. How can we accomplish some of these macro levels of adaptation? I don't know that the movement really matters. And then when you look at some anecdotal things, you look at, particularly strongman, which is highly athletic and certainly incredibly alactic. So there are some parallels to what we see in team sport, and there's certainly some parallels in what we see in general fitness as far as accelerating certain aesthetic looking changes. They're still ruthlessly strong, ruthlessly fit, for their sport, and you're going to see some videos of some guys handling some serious weight on machines. And I don't know that their rationale is going after these macro measures such as hormonal value, mitochondria, type 1, type 2 fibers, et cetera, et cetera. But you know, when you find a role for that in the training program, you might find that training on machines fits a particular goal. And then I look at myself where, especially over the last several years, where I'm traveling, sometimes, for long periods of time, almost every week, and getting into commercial gyms, I just tried it. Now I'm not training for sport. I'm not training for powerlifting. I'm not I don't necessarily need my training to translate into some other physical endeavor. I'd like to look a certain way. I'd like to feel good, and then you also have to take advantage of what's available. But I also anything that I try, anything that I talk about in terms of training, I have done. There's zero message that I have a position on in training that I haven't done myself. That's just, I think there's value. I'm only one N of one, but at least I can communicate and I can create perspectives because I've actually tried it. My knees didn't explode. Now, I never got on a leg press because one thing that I think is important when we talk about training on a lower body is that you should at least have an opportunity to explore hip extension during the motion. So on most leg press, you're not getting close to hip extension. What I found at the Golds out in Venice was that if you use the super squat, which is like a hack squat where you face in, you can finish into extension. Now you're on an angle, so you really have to dig under and tuck under at the top. But you do get an opportunity to get very, very close to hip extension, whereas almost any other machine that you're not going to get there. So I would think of, we would use a standing hamstring way before you'd ever use a lying hamstring that always has this curve that rounds you out. And of course, that puts the hamstring on a different level of sufficiency. You can probably feel it more. But now if you take a steady diet of training, strength and power, etc., even these macro values like hormones and mitochondria, and don't explore hip extension, for me, that's the threshold for deciding there. Now, upper body stuff, golly, does it, I just didn't see that it had this horrible effect on me. Now, it's certainly not therapeutic, and you're not going to be able to explore multiple planes. I remember reading, golly, what was the book? You can't tell him anything. Like he says he's fully formed. I can't even remember the dude's name, probably for good reason. Very famous powerlifting coach, and I was gifted the book from. Oh man, what is anyway? Can't tell him anything. Like if you asked him a question and he didn't agree with it, he was fully formed. He couldn't learn from anybody. Be careful with this. But he made a very good point in that book that if you train on a machine that only moves in one plane, you're only getting 33% of that particular value since you can't control the other two planes. Made a lot of sense. So my message is not to train on machines, but I think there's going to be certain periods of time that if it doesn't negatively affect how you move, and it fits into this probably very long-term training approach, I'm not sure there's this, it says demonized as probably I once felt. In no way is it a better option. In no way is it a better option because you'll never be able to access all of the organelles that Eric was talking about getting into the tissue. But I'm not sure, if you have more and they're there, and then you put yourself through proper motor skill acquisition and other forms of training that have better carryover, I wonder if this is something that's useful. Now, from a business standpoint, probably very stupid. You can only do one thing on that machine, and obviously maybe you could do more if you turn sideways and do all this crazy stuff that elite bodybuilders will use. Is it wrong? Man, it's I almost feel like I have to apologize for saying no. I don't know that it's as wrong as maybe I thought it once was. People with lower body, non-weight bearing status. I have an athlete. I'm working with a basketball player right now, who's been now 4 weeks. Now we obviously have all these other limitations about getting into a gym, but I mean, if we had a row of like 10 machines, we get after it old school 1970, before anybody was born. Sets of 20 or real hit. Upper body, no rest, lower body, no rest, upper body. I would love to try it with this kid, and feed 4,000 calories down his throat, and let's actually see how impressive the healing of his lower body injury would be during that time, because we certainly would be respecting all of the non-weight bearing status, but we're not trying that because we don't necessarily have access. A lot of things. During that Twitter, I'll make another video discussing this particular topic and the reasons why I chose not to engage, because I think a lot of people know made a significant shift in my life several years ago by not getting involved with these watermelons on social media. I use the word watermelon very, very specifically. It's very difficult to argue with a watermelon because I don't know anybody that ever convinced a watermelon of anything. And that's what it's like discussing. And I used to be more combative in terms of positioning how I felt. But I don't think social media, I don't look at social media as this dissemination of democratic dissemination of ideas. It's not how I view it. If other people do, that's fine. I'm not in on that. Where Coach Boyle was talking about using knee extensions, particularly in the ACL rehabilitation process. I'll make another video about that coming up, but ultimately that's a whole nother topic given what we think we know about the ACL. But for knee extension for a healthy knee, I'm not sure it's the best choice, but I'm not sure it's a really bad choice. And I think there's probably an opportunity to apply these techniques to get a particularly physiological response. Probably won't translate all of them to the motor skills that we're looking for, but those organelles are in there, and I've been considering that for a very, very long time. So hopefully that makes sense and gives a little bit of color. There probably are other topics that I'm thinking of when I made that tweet, and I've only had an opportunity to present my Perform Better talk once this year in LA, and there's probably about 4 or 5 different things that I feel like I owe the universe to what my position is on these different things. So some of the other ones was training the neck in general, the packed neck, crunches, which I'm not any different on. It's just asinine to think that that's a good way to train, and we're just going to ignore things that are highly scientific, and other people back off. They're like, well, it all depends. No, it doesn't depend. It doesn't depend. There's good exercises and there's bad exercises in terms of risk reward. And I guess you want it to depend. Fine, then you can do these things. You're not gonna. My back's gonna feel fine. So that's we'll make maybe another couple other videos, and at some point I'm sure all of the presenters at Perform Better will probably figure out a way to get an opportunity coming up to everybody can get a good look at what everybody was trying to talk about for this year. So hopefully that all makes sense, and we'll make another couple other videos carrying on what we were just talking about.